This is going to be a short video looking at the supply of goods and services. So we'll be looking at the factors which determine the supply of a good or service, causes of changes in supply, and the supply curve. Just like we did in the demand video, let's start by taking a look at what supply is. Supply is defined as the quantity of a good or service that producers are willing and able to sell at any given price within a given time period. The law of supply is very similar to the law of demand. It states that ceteris paribus, or after all other variables are kept constant, as the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied of that good also rises. Let's see how this plays out when we try to plot a supply curve using some production data. I've just made this data up, so you can think of the quantity being in kilograms of apples or in thousands of pens. The concept follows through in any case. When the price is anywhere between 0 and 2, quantity supplied is 0. This makes sense as a profit-maximizing producer isn't going to supply a good or service at a loss. So in this case, 2 is the minimum price at which producers are willing to supply their products. As the price of the good increases, so does quantity supplied. This is because higher prices will likely lead to higher profit levels, making suppliers even more willing to supply. And because higher profit levels can be reinvested into expanding production and buying more raw materials, higher prices allow suppliers to produce more goods and services. This explains why the supply curve is upward sloping, and not downward sloping like the demand curve. Determinants of supply are simply reasons, apart from price, why the supply of a good or service may change. An acronym I've used to remember these is PINTS WC. This stands for productivity, indirect taxes, the number of firms, technology, subsidies, weather, and costs of production. We'll be going through each of these in turn now. Productivity measures how much of a good or service can be produced given a set quantity of factor inputs. In other words, it's a measure of how efficient a firm's production process is. A more productive firm can produce more goods and services with a set quantity of factor inputs, reducing their average costs of production, or their costs of production per unit produced. This means that for any given price, the firm makes more profit and is therefore incentivized to supply more. This leads to an outward shift in the supply curve. Indirect taxes are taxes on goods and services bought by consumers. VAT is a good example. As indirect taxes are imposed on producers, they're essentially an additional cost of production. There's also another force at work here. Having to pay indirect taxes means that less money in a firm's annual budget can be spent on acquiring raw materials and other factors of production. This means that indirect taxes reduce both a firm's ability and incentive to supply, and this clearly causes an inward shift in the supply curve. The number of firms in a market is also a key determinant of supply. For example, if there is only one farmer growing and supplying tomatoes, then the tomato supply isn't going to be very high, whereas if there were 50 farmers growing tomatoes, supply would be a lot higher. This means that if many firms enter a market, for example because they see the potential to make higher profits by doing so, supply is likely going to increase at any given price, shifting the supply curve outwards. On the other hand, if many firms leave a market because they can make more profits elsewhere, supply in that market is going to fall, causing the supply curve to shift inwards. Technology is an important long-run factor affecting market supply, as technological innovations, improving tools, and other capital equipment increase productivity levels. This allows a firm to produce more in a given period of time, shifting the supply curve outwards. Think agricultural innovations such as fertilizers and pesticides, and more recent ones such as vertical farming and hydroponics. All of these have boosted agricultural supply. Subsidies are the opposite of taxes. Rather than the government imposing an extra cost on producers, subsidies are grants given to producers in order to encourage the production of a good or service. As subsidies reduce costs of production for firms, they free up more money which can be spent on acquiring more raw materials to produce more goods. This allows a firm to produce more at any given price, shifting the supply curve outwards. There is currently a £2,500 plug-in car grant in the UK, which is having this exact effect in the electric car market. Weather is a crucial determinant of supply in agricultural markets. This is because the weather largely determines how high crop yields are going to be. If the weather is favourable, output is going to be higher. But if there are floods, droughts, or invasions of pests, crops could be decimated, reducing agricultural supply to near zero. Finally, any other changes in costs of production can affect supply. If costs of production fall due to an appreciation in the exchange rate, reducing the value of imported raw materials, firms can afford to buy more factor inputs to produce more goods and services. This shifts the supply curve outwards. On the other hand, if costs rise due to an increase in the minimum wage, there will be an inward shift in the supply curve. A key idea you should be aware of is that changes in price will only lead to extensions and contractions of supply along the supply curve, whereas changes in any non-price determinants of supply will cause shifts in the entire supply curve. This is a useful diagram showing you how this works. Any changes in price will only cause movements, so extensions or contractions, along the original supply curve, shown here in pink, whereas changes to the pints WC factors will shift the entire supply curve to the left or to the right. Here are 3 price or non-price factors. In each case, determine how they affect supply on a supply and demand graph. Pause the video here if you'd like to attempt this on your own. To start off, floods hitting an agricultural region are clear examples of how the weather can impact supply, and given that this is a non-price factor, we're going to see an inward shift in the supply curve. Secondly, consumers buying more pasta isn't going to shift the supply curve through any of the pints WC factors, but we are told that there is an increase in the demand for pasta which pushes pasta prices up. From the previous slide we know that changes in price only lead to movements along the supply curve, so in this case what we see is an outward shift in the demand curve leading to an extension in supply along the existing supply curve. Lastly, increasing a solar panel subsidy reduces costs of production for solar panel producers, making more money available to buy more raw materials and increase output. This leads to an outward shift in the supply curve. We've reached the end of the video now. Here's a news article and some accompanying questions related to supply. Thank you very much for watching.